and we will formally begin. Warwick's is pleased to host Jeffrey Breslow as he discusses his new memoir, A Game Maker's Life. A Hall of Fame game inventor and executive tells the inside story of the toy industry. And he is joined in conversation with his co-author, Cynthia Beebe. Jeffrey Breslow is a preeminent toy and game inventor and designer, and spent more than 41 years inventing games and toys since graduating with a BFA from the University of Illinois in industrial design. In 1976, at the age of 34, he became the youngest managing partner of Marvin Glass and Associates, the leading toy design company in the world. Glass and Associates created games such as Simon, Operation, Gestures, the Evel Knievel motorcycle, Mousetrap, one of my favorites, and Uno Attack. Breslow was inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame in New York City in '88 and left the toy business to sculpt full-time in 2008. His sculptures are on display at the University of Illinois and the Lurie Children's Hospital, and on permanent display in Vermont, California, New Jersey, and Uruguay. And I've scoped them out and they're really freaking cool. So I would urge you all to go to his website and check them out. He will discuss A Game Maker's Life in conversation with Cynthia Beebe, who is equally awesome. Cynthia Beebe is the author of Boots in the Ashes, Busting Bombers, Arsonists, and Outlaws as a Trailblazing Female ATF Agent. Beebe is a retired senior special agent with the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. She spent 27 years investigating bombings, arson, murder, illegal firearms, gangs, and other crimes. Her cases were chronicled in the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, and Ladies' Home Journal, and were covered on all the major stations and on 48 Hours. Beebe is a member of the International Association of Bomb Technicians and Investigators, the International Association of Arson Investigators, and Women in Federal Law Enforcement. She has a BA in English Literature and a master's in journalism, both from Northwestern University. Since her retirement, she has appeared as an expert commentator on law enforcement issues for WGN Radio and Television, and she lives in Chicago with her son. Before I leave the screen, for those watching live, please do remember to use the Facebook comments to submit questions. And after they're done with their conversation, I'll pop back on screen and convey those questions. So without further ado, Warwick's welcomes Jeffrey Breslow in conversation with Cynthia Beebe.
Jeffrey, why don't I start by asking you a couple basic things, and also
Sure.
Mostly I want to show off the cover of the book because it's such a great cover, and I think it explains so much of what Jeffrey did. It's a fun book cover because he had a wonderful, fun career. Why don't you start by telling us just a bit about who you are and your career and what made you decide to write a book?
Okay. First of all, you need to know I was a terrible student in high school and I was flunking out of college, and I took a trip to University of Illinois. The only A I had in high school was in art, and I had a wonderful art teacher. And I saw a display of industrial design in the corridor of the new building at the University of Illinois. And it was instructor Ed Zagorski, and his office was across the hall. I knocked on the office, and in 20 minutes, he changed my life. I left there, decided I wanted to be an industrial designer. I started studying. I made the dean's list. I transferred, and then I had to start over again as a freshman. So a year and a half of school went down the drain. My folks weren't happy, but they were happy I found a career for myself. And I was lucky enough to have Ed Zagorski mentor me for most of my life. I mean, for 65 years, we were dear friends. He died a year and a half ago with 99 and a quarter. He said a quarter. He said, if you ask a little child how old you are, they say 5 and a half, 4 3/4. He said at 90, you can start using fractions again. So I was very lucky to have not only a mentor in high school in the art, but my first major mentor was Ed Zagorski. And then I was lucky enough to go to work for Marvin Glass a number of years later, who was the preeminent design company in toys in the world at that time. So that's kind of a quick introduction. There's a lot more, but that gets it started.
So I'll briefly mention that the way that I became your co-author was we had a mutual friend, a woman named Sheila King, who owns a PR firm in Chicago. I'm in the Chicago area, and so is Jeffrey. And Sheila had read my first book, and she knew that Jeffrey had been working on his memoir with other writers for quite some time, and but it hadn't quite happened. And Sheila suggested that Jeffrey listen to my book, my audiobook, and he did. And he and I ended up working together through a mutual friend. And I knew from the very first time I talked to Jeffrey, we would have a good time writing this book. It certainly was, for the most part, a different topic than my original memoir. And I'm young enough that, you know, when I was a little kid, I was playing with these toys that Jeffrey invented as a young man. So I remember being 4 and 5 years old and playing with Bucket of Fun and Ants in the Pants. And then when I was a bit older, I played with Masterpiece. And of course, Simon was a huge hit when that came out. So it was easy for me to agree to write this book because I knew what a huge impact all these wonderful toys had, not on just me, but my family and my friends and really the whole world. So Jeffrey, what do you think when you say that you met Ed Zagorski and he became your mentor, but what do you think made you capable of becoming such a wonderful inventor, particularly of toys?
Well, I grew up taking things apart. I mean, every time I had an opportunity for something, I wanted to know how it worked and everything else. One of my favorite toys as a young child was a Rector set because you could build things with it. There's motors and pieces, and it was kind of an open type of toy at the time. I mean, it didn't tell you what to build, but it gave you all these pieces and parts. And I grew up building stuff, and then I grew up taking stuff apart. So that was kind of inherent in my psyche at that time. I wanted to know how things work more than anything else. But I really didn't know anything about industrial design until I was, went down to see Ed. And when he told me about design, I was just kind of fascinated by it because the mantra is form follows function. Okay. And it has to work. And then it can look beautiful. Okay. And the example is, you can make a beautiful chair, but if it's not comfortable to sit in, it's not a very good product, So that kind of intrigued me, that was the whole purpose of design is that it's got to function and then it can look beautiful. Okay. Looking beautiful, if it doesn't work, doesn't happen. And I was just intrigued with that. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. I actually didn't know I wanted to be a toy designer until we did a toy project in my sophomore year. The freshman year in art school down there is all the same for everybody. Interior design, graphic design, industrial design, painting, sculpting, all the foundation courses. So I didn't get to do industrial design until my sophomore year. And that's when we did a toy project and I was just hooked. I mean, that was most of the students in industrial design at that time were all men. There were no women. I mean, it was kind of like medicine or law or anything else. Ultimately, women became industrial designers as well, but not at the time. But all of the kids in the class wanted to go to Detroit and design automobiles. That's what everybody wanted, not me. I did a toy project and that's what I wanted to do. And I was lucky enough to come to Marvin's door and got hired. And that's where it all began. So it was, and the hardest thing to learn in that field, in the toy design or in any creative thing is that it's built on failure. That you fail, whether you're writing books, whether you're making music, making movies, Broadway shows, it's all built on failure. And that's unless you're prepared for that, it's not the right career for you. But the good news, it allows you to dream and fantasize. This is the next greatest, biggest, whatever, whether it's a movie or all the things I mentioned. So that was, that worked for me at the time.
One of my favorite things in writing the book was writing about Marvin Glass, who was the man who hired you and was your mentor, one of your primary mentors, and clearly just an extraordinary man. I wish I'd had a chance to meet him. A friend of mine did meet him in addition to you and said he was very remarkable. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Marvin and how he influenced you in your career?
Well, Marvin was the same kind of mold as Steve Jobs. Okay, you loved him or hated him when you worked for him, and Steve was the same way. The second thing is there was nothing more important than work. Not your personal life, not your children, not your family. And Steve Jobs and Marvin were exactly the same. Work, 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 work. You know, so that's what. And I don't think you get to be what Marvin did or Steve Jobs if that's not your total focus in life. It just works out that way. But he was kind of a character. And what I was fascinated by is he invented the business of independent toy design. He invented that business. And he tried manufacturing toys in the late 50s and he kept losing his ass. He said, I don't want to do that anymore. And he basically looked at the music business, looked at the book business and said, I want to do that in the toy business. I want to design toys for the manufacturers and license them on a royalty basis. And that was kind of unheard of because the history of the toy industry was somebody had an idea and they built a toy company. Mattel was Ruth and Elliot Handler. Elliot was an industrial designer. Ruth was a businessman and they started a toy company. And so the history of most toy companies was like that. So getting them to look at your ideas and getting them to accept the idea that they might need our help in licensing things was Marvin's genius at the time. The other thing he did that was astounding is that creative people work for the applause. I mean, if you're on the stage making music or anything else, and he understood that. You can't say to somebody, I'm going to double your salary, be more creative. It doesn't work that way. But Marvin, if you were there a week and you had a prototype, you were in the office pitching that to the vice president, the president of a big toy company. You're wet behind the ears and you get right in there. And you show it, you present it, you explain it. The guy says, nope, don't like it, next, okay? And you go out, okay? Now, the next thing, you show something, the guy says, it's fantastic, I love it, blah, blah, blah. That's what you work for. That was what everybody did there. You wanted, and if you weren't in that conference room when a client came in with your product, you bet your bottom, you were working much harder. So that is the motivation. It's not money that motivates creative people. It's that sort of thing. It's the applause. It's when you're a band in front of, I mean, that's what it is. And Marvin understood that. So the other thing that fuels creativity that Marvin understood is pressure. You have to have meetings all the time. I mean, if a meeting is set and then it's canceled, it takes another week to finish the same amount of work you would have had. So you work under pressure, whether you're an artist, whatever you're doing. So those two elements he understood very well, and he was a real character. I mean, it was fun working for him, And we worked all-nighters. We worked Saturday, Sunday. I mean, because he wanted to do that. He hated a 3-day holiday weekend. That was just, he couldn't stand it. Anyhow.
Why don't you run us a little bit through one of your most important games, or called Ants in the Pants? It's still for sale 50 years later. You invented it in 1968, maybe?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
and it's still for sale. You can still buy it on Amazon. And why don't you tell us a little bit how you first came up with the idea, and then how you and one or two other people at your work helped you actually produce the
well,
and then get the sale.
When I got hired by Marvin, 2 years after I finished school, I had another job first. And I went in and I had a portfolio with kids stuff in there and games and everything. And he hired me. And I walked out of there and I didn't ask him any question. I was, this was on a Tuesday. I'm going to work Monday. And my folks and my wife at the time said, well, do you have an office? I don't know. You get a vacation? I don't know. Health insurance? I don't know. I was just so excited for the job. But what I did is I went to Toys R Us and I spent 4 or 5 days there every day looking around. And that was very important to me. And then I started creating, I saw games and things on the shelf and I looked at the name, hands down. I looked at other stuff and I thought the name was, did the person who created that come up with the name first or the product first? And I was intrigued by that. And then I started writing down idioms, bird in the hand, ants in the pants. I had lists and lists of things and maybe 20, 30 lists of these things. And then I would look at the list and say, oh, ants in the pants. That sounds interesting. I like that name. And now I have to figure out how to get some ants inside a little pair of pants. I mean, that's what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was as simple as that. But uh, what made it work is that the ants became a self-contained tiddlywink. In other words, I tried to launcher different types of things, but I was able to bend a piece of plastic working with a model maker in a kind of a V shape. So when you push the end of the ant down and let go, it jumped up in the air. And that was pretty exciting, you know. And then it jumped straight up. And then I had to kind of cut the front legs down a little bit. So when you did that, it jumped forward, you know. So that was the process. The ideas, especially in our business, are a combination of the idea and the execution, okay? And there are pure examples of that I can give you. One is hula hoop, okay? That was a pure idea. Anybody could have made that. I mean, you know, a little bigger, a little smaller, it still would have worked. And then at the other extreme was Rock'em Sock'em Robots. My partner, Bert Meyer, did that even before I got there. And if you say, okay, let's make a couple boxers, they box in the ring, no batteries, you push and the head pops up. That idea is not worth a lot unless somebody executes it. So those are extreme examples, but most of them are a great idea with a great execution. And that's what it was. And that's what Ants in the Pants was. There was no assembly. It came out of the mold into the box, and everything I did, when the client saw it, he said, it's mine. That was it. You know, I mean, he just bought it on the spot. He loved the name. He loved the ease of making it. There was really no assembly at all. The ants came out of the mold. The other pieces came out of the mold. You put them in the box and you're done, you know. And the other thing is not much in the way of rules. People don't really like reading rules. So, I mean, it's 2 sentences, push down the, you know, I mean, so it fit all the things that make something like that last as long as it did. You know, it's fun to play. It goes very young. You don't have to read. You know, you've got your own color ants, so you know who wins. And that was pretty much it. Did I expect it to last 50 years? No way, you know, but it's amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And, you know, maybe it'll keep going another 50 years.
Who knows?
Well, you did an extraordinary number of toys on your own as an inventor. And then, you know, I need to bring up one of the reasons that Jeffrey and I were connected by Sheila King is Jeffrey worked for Marvin Glass and Associates in Chicago in 1967. It was on LaSalle Street in downtown Chicago, and they had about 70 or 80 employees. And unfortunately, and I vaguely remember this, I was a teenager at the time in Chicago, and there happened one of the first mass workplace shootings in the country at Marvin Glass and Associates. And that's another reason Sheila thought about me for helping Jeffrey to write the book. But Jeffrey, why don't you tell us a little bit about that incident and how that affected you and how it changed you and the company?
Well, this was somebody who worked for us for 7 years. He was an electrical engineer. He got raises on a regular basis. He'd just come back from delivering a project with another designer in New York, and they went out and celebrated. So when he showed up that Tuesday with 2 guns at work, it was a shock to everybody. Nobody, you know, I mean, it wasn't like somebody came in off the street. This was a guy who worked for us 7 years. So when he walked in the building, you know, I don't know what if he hid the guns. I mean, nobody would have paid any attention to what an employee walking in the building going up, you know, up the stairs. I mean, and he actually expected all the partners to be in Anson's office, in the managing partner's office at that time. And that would have been about 9 or 10 of us. But I just stepped out for a phone call, and it was an inconsequential phone call. There were only 3 of us left in the office, Anson Isaacson, Joe Callan, and myself. And Pauline called me in the office on the phone and said, Jim Salem's on the phone. And she sensed that I didn't remember him. And it was a guy writing an article about Evel Knievel, who was from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And I said, all right, put it in the office across the hall. It was that simple. And if I said, take a message, I'll call him back, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I mean, it was that. So the fact that he killed 2 of my partners, he shot a young woman that worked for us, he wounded 2 people, and then he took his own life when he got in front of his own office, and it was all over. So it was tragic, because not only the people killed and everything else, but this took place in our place where we had fun, played games, designed toys, and everything else. So the recovery process was, if it had happened somewhere else, or if it had been somebody from the outside, it would have had a little bit different effect. But it was kind of brutal for us because he was one of our own. And what surprised me that week is about half the people went to his funeral. We had funerals all week. And I didn't go to his funeral, but people said, well, that wasn't the guy we knew, but it was still the guy that killed people and killed himself. So it was hard to get going again. But we had a very successful business. We had, maybe 60 employees at that time, and we were supporting almost 150, 200 family members and everything else. So there was no alternative except to continue the business. And I ended up becoming, at 34 years old, the managing partner because nobody wanted the job. The one guy that wanted the job, nobody wanted him to do it. So I got it by default. So.
You did something interesting back then that's now standard practice in these incidents, and I won't dwell on it too much, but you brought in, at that time, no one would have ever heard of this. After the following week, you contacted a psychiatrist or psychologist who was an expert in dealing with mass traumas and brought him.
Yes, I don't remember how I got to him. Okay, but somebody told me, somebody who knew somebody, and I called him up, and he knew what happened and everything else, and he told me he would come. This happened. The shooting happened on a Tuesday. The funeral was all week. We're opening up the next Monday, and I was scared out of my mind. Everybody coming back to the place. We had two of our maintenance guys cleaning up blood and everything, and it was horrific. But he said to me that when everybody gets together, you have to talk about where you were, why you didn't get killed. Okay, you were in the bathroom, you were downstairs, you were upstairs, and you walked out of the office. If somebody doesn't go over and over and over again why they survived, they're going to have a problem later on. So he said the most important thing is to talk where you were, why you survived, why. So he stayed with us a little over a week, and there was one woman who worked for us that was best friends with Kathy, who was killed, and she had a tough time. She couldn't even talk about it and everything else. And she was the longest for recovery. And at some point, I don't know how many months or years later, she ended up leaving the company. It was too difficult for her. And she was, of all the ones that were there, she was the one I think that suffered the most from what happened, because it was her close friend, number one, and she refused to talk about it, number two. It kind of showed me that this guy knew what he was talking about, because we continued the business. Yeah.
In fact, what kind of saved your business, or not that it was failing, but lo and behold, about a year after that, along came the game Simon, which was a huge blockbuster. So why don't you tell us a bit about Simon and how that really was invented by your partner, Howard Morrison, and also what it did for your company?
Well, it was at the beginning of electronics. And Howard had an electrical background, not really an electronic background. Nobody had an electronic background at that time. But they had seen something at a show, an arcade show, and it was kind of a memory game. And memory games at arcade, nobody's interested in that at all. There's shoot-up games, Pac-Man, that kind of thing, not a memory game standing in front of a big box in an arcade. It just was a disaster. But he saw something in there, and he came into my office, and he said, grab a pencil. I said, okay. And he did this. He tapped something, and I tapped it, and he tapped something else. And he said, I think we can use this new Texas Instrument chip to generate sounds and lights, and you kind of follow it along. I said, okay, sounds okay to me, and that was the beginning of it. But Howard, I did mostly games. My other partner, Ruben, did mostly dolls. Howard did everything. He was the most amazing toy designer that there ever was. He did dolls, games, toys, plush, ride-ons, Simon. SSP Racer. He was just, and what helped our business is that we knew what we were good at and what we weren't good at. And Howard, in spite of his incredible talent, was a terrible businessman. He knew that. I said, Howard, you don't have to lie to our clients, but don't tell them everything. Don't tell them we just showed this to another guy last week. You don't have to tell them that, But he was that kind of a guy. He was just a wonderful, and he's 90 years old. He's failing, everything else. But I just saw him this past weekend, and he's just the dear, sweet man who never had a bad bone in his whole body. He was just, and Howard Rubin and I worked together for 33 years. Marvin hired all three of us the same year, myself in April, Howard and Rubin in November. And we all ended up becoming partners, and we became dear, dear friends. And we traveled together, we skied together. It wasn't just working together. We were very good friends, and that was part of it. And again, recognizing our weaknesses and our strengths was the strength of the business. And then we started over. We had a chance to start over a new company, Big Monster Toys, in 1988. Anyhow.
I hate
So
to
when we showed, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I hate to come back in because I can tell there's so many amazing. I love that story about Simon. Just do this, do that.
Yeah. Oh no.
Something about memory games. I used to love the kinds that were just cards.
It was not just a memory game. The game had the tones, and the tones, no matter how you played them, it's like a bugle. There's a C, a lower C, and then two other notes. And that was what was on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We had a meeting. I went out and met Spielberg, and we didn't bring the game, and he thought we did the game from the movie, and we thought he did the movie for the game. None of that happened, but we had a meeting with him. It was kind of interesting. But so no matter how you push the buttons, it always sounded good. They all worked together. And if you remember that movie, when the spaceship came down, it was playing the same tones that we had in Simon. It always sounded good. The other thing, Howard had a great sense of humor. And after you got 4, it sped up on you. Okay, you got 4 in a row. I'm going to do this. Now it's going faster. He had a sense of humor that was wonderful. He was like a child. And he did another thing called SSP Racer, which is a gyro racing car. Okay. And Marvin, when we're all partners, he said, all right, the first partner who comes up with an idea that generates $1 million in royalty, I'm going to give you a check for $50,000. Okay. Just like that. And that was SSP Racer. Okay. And he gives Howard a check for $50,000. Howard goes to the bank across the street. He puts $40,000 in his account. He gets $10,000 in $100 bills. He comes back to the office and he's passing out $100 bills. Oh, you helped me with this. You thought about this. He's passing out $100 bills, $10,000 worth to all the employees and model makers and everybody who might have said something or helped him. He was a wonderful, kind man. Very special. So I'm very lucky to have somebody like that. And I just saw him on Saturday. He came to a book signing that I was at. So anyhow, you know what? We worked very hard, but it was a fun job. And it wasn't, if you came up with the ideas that we did, the business part of it was very easy to run, If you were in the advertising business, okay, which is a creative business, okay, one day one of your biggest accounts comes and says, I'm not working, I'm going with somebody else. And all of a sudden, what do? No, nothing. We're just trying somebody. We never lost a client. Mattel, Hasbro, Fisher Price, that would all come see us, because we put good things on the table. And then there was the whole issue about testing toys. We never tested with kids. We had enough kids working at the company. We don't need it. I believe testing is kind of a fallacy. It's a way of, okay, if it didn't work, well, we tested it, but the product didn't work, And a funny story about Marvin that I like to tell and is in the book. We had a client come in from England, a new client, okay, first time. And we were sitting around the conference room with a number of partners and Marvin. And the client said, do you test your toys with kids? And Marvin looked him in the eye and he said, I haven't seen a kid in 20 years. That's what he said. and it was true, we didn't need a show with that kid, if you test, I'll give you some examples. Barbie came out in 1958, okay? And if you tested that with mothers, they would say, are you kidding? I'm going to buy that doll for my daughter, big boobs, little tiny feet. nobody would have tested that thing. Nobody would have made it. But Ruth believed in it. Rubik's Cube, one of the best, if you tested it, 99.9% of the people can never solve it. You're selling something that I can't solve, never sell. I would not, one more, Cabbage Patch, okay? The doll experts, Mattel and Ideals, ugly doll, you can't make everyone different, never sell. It was made by Coleco. They didn't test it. They never made a doll. They thought, okay, this is kind of cute, let's make it. Giant success. So you can't, if you could test that, movie companies wouldn't make bad movies, they wouldn't make bad plays, wouldn't make bad TV shows. So testing doesn't work in the creative world. It just doesn't. It's an excuse. Well, we tested it and tested great, but it didn't sell. So we never tested anything. We had enough kids working at the place. That's all.
I know your time is short, but I do want to ask, I have to ask,
Sure.
After that horrible traumatic event, how did it affect your creative processes? Did you go through a time of toy maker's block? Like, how did you?
No. You know what? If you go through a block, if you're having a tough time, okay, go to Toys R Us, spend the whole day walking up and down the aisles. You'll come back, you'll come up with all kinds of ideas. I don't buy the block thing. I mean, if you're creative, you can always create. It may not be if you're writing music, you can always write music. It may not be a best, if you're a writer, you can write books. You can always write another book. May not be a good book. So the creative block, I never saw anybody have it. If somebody felt it a little bit, I said, take the afternoon off and go to Toys R Us. Now you can't do that anymore. Amazon is the biggest toy seller. So we miss Toys R Us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite toy when you were young?
Actually, a Rector set. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I loved the Rector set because I could build stuff with it. There was nothing, you bought all these beams and pieces and everything else, and you just, a little motor, a screwdriver, and you built stuff. So I also played with Tinker Toys. Those were at that time, and Basket was a game I loved with a little ping pong ball. But anyhow, so all the people that worked for us had something. They collected comic books. They did this. They did that. There was something that made them come to us. And the other thing, because we could do anything for any client, Howard came up with the idea for a Mickey Mouse telephone. It wasn't a toy. And we said, "Wow, holy cow, a phone that's Mickey Mouse?" And we tried to sell it to AT&T, and they laughed at us. They said, "That's not a phone. That's a toy." No, it actually works. So we ended up selling it to a smaller company. So my point is, if you work for Fisher Price, you can only do preschool. If you work for Parker Brothers, only games. If you work for us, you can do anything you want. Anything you want. And if we didn't have a client for it, we find a client for it. That's all.
What's your number one piece of advice for someone who wants to be creative as a profession? Even though I know you said it shouldn't be about the money. You create because you're creative.
I believe in hard work. Okay. I believe you have to work hard, at whatever you're doing, I mean, if you want to catch the bus, you got to be on the corner when the bus comes by. I mean, so I believe that hard, and I have a sign in my studio: the harder you work, the luckier you become. Okay. The Beatles spent 9 years in Germany perfecting their music. They were not an overnight success, I can give you a lot more examples, but nothing takes the place of working hard. Now, you have to be lucky. I was lucky that I met Zagorski. I had a lot of luck in my life. I mean, you make a left turn, your right turn, everything changes. If I don't answer the phone call, I'm not talking to you right now. So but you have to be prepared for something coming along. You have to be open to something coming along. That's all. But if I have to give advice, the other thing is I'm very big in mentoring. I mean, I had 4 mentors in my life, and I got involved in a mentoring program at the University of Illinois. And the mentoring program is the mentee grabs a hold of somebody and doesn't let go. When I went into Ed Zagorski's office, he thought, he just talked to me as another kid. He didn't know the effect he had upon me. I walked out of there and I said, I need to be industrial design. He had no idea. He told me years later. He was one more kid coming in. So I grabbed a hold of him and I never let go. for 67 years. He was my close friend, my dear friend. We traveled together. So I believe in mentoring, but you need to find somebody, and a mentor is not a parent. It's somebody, it's a teacher, it's somebody else. And I'm lucky. I had Marvin, I had 4 mentors in my life, which I'm very proud of and very lucky. I've got maybe Cynthia can keep talking, but I'm actually at my grandson's house today, and they're leaving, and I got to go watch 2 of my grandsons.
All right.
But thank you for having me. And I hope Cynthia can continue a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. And it's you know what? It's very exciting. It's exciting because people see it and it brings back memory of childhood. I mean, that's what the cover does. I mean, one last story. I was doing an interview a few months ago, and the guy who I was talking to on the radio said he and his brother used to fight over Evel Knievel toy. They only had one. And I said, well, you must be in your early 50s. He said, I am, and then we started the interview. So these toys touch people, and everybody has a favorite game, a favorite toy, something they grew up with. You even asked me what was my favorite toy as a kid. So that's part of it. It's a part of our life.
One more very, very quick question. If someone
Sure.
wants to keep up with what you're doing, do you have a favored social media platform, or
I really,
just your website?
Yeah. There's a website for the sculpture. There's a website for the book. I'm not on Facebook. I missed all that. I'm a little too old for that. I just, you know what? It's not something that appealed to me when it came out. I mean, the idea of, okay, I got to tell people where I'm having meal and show pics. I understand it's big thing for people, and it does a lot of things, but I don't even have a Facebook account, to be honest.
It sounds like you're connecting with people in other
in a different way.
Meaningful ways.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for
thank you very
coming on
much
today. Yeah.
Delighted.
Jeffrey.
Okay.
I do have one more question for Cynthia. Bye,
Okay.
Jeffrey.
Bye. Thank you.
Sure.
Or maybe a couple more questions for you. I was going to ask, so do you have anything in the pipeline, whether connected to this project or anything you're working on writing?
Yes, actually, I have several things that have kind of just exploded in the last few weeks, really. But so in relation to A Game Maker's Life, which I'll again show you, because I can take no credit for the cover, but if you can see how all the games are kind of here in an L shape almost, and the colors, the bright colors on there. Anyways, what I've learned, that this is my second book, but this kind of to create something like this is a big pain in the neck, and a lot of people contribute and work very hard to do it, and the graphic designers, and anyways, we were all incredibly happy with the cover finally after much work. So that's why I keep showing you the cover, is just to say it really can make a big difference on a book. But so with A Game Maker's Life, when I first talked to Jeffrey early in 2020, and again, because of my age, I'm early 60s, and I was absolutely at the perfect age to be playing with Jeffrey's most famous toys when I was a little kid. And so I knew exactly what he was talking about. It struck me immediately that this would be a great book to be made into a sitcom. And so I wrote a sitcom script that's with my agents now. Whether or not it sells for sitcom, I don't know, but we're hoping, and Jeffrey and I are both hoping, that it'll sell for a sitcom, or if it were to sell for a movie of his life, of course, it would include the shooting episode. So it would be a much different movie than it would be a sitcom. The sitcom would be of his life before the shooting. But obviously that was such a drastic and horrific and huge event that they can't, they have to be separated. But
right.
At any rate, but I'm also working on my first book, which is Boots in the Ashes. I have a company interested in working on both a podcast and 2 different television shows on that right now. And then I don't want to tell you his name, but I think I am going to be doing a biography of a friend of Jeffrey's who's was a very well-known creative guy in Hollywood. Let me leave it at that. and I hope to be doing that. I have new agents with United Talent Agency who are just fantastic. And but I should know within a week or two if I'll be doing that third book with him. But if not, I certainly have other books in mind and podcasts and television shows and so on. So I hope to be building this, making really a second career out of this, because being a federal agent was my first career, but I was a lit major and I have a master's in journalism. So I was always a writer at heart as well. So thank you.
Super exciting.
Yeah,
I put a link for your book in the comments here if anyone would like to check it out. And if someone wants to follow all this exciting stuff that's happening to you, do you have a preferred social media outlet? Or
I should, and I do, and but I'm not very good at keeping up on it because but I have a Facebook page for my book, Boots in the Ashes. I have a Twitter account, but I haven't tweeted in a while. But it is with every good intention. I want to get back on there, but I do have CynthiaBeebe.com is my website as well. And
Great.
I'm happy to answer people's questions. If they want to ask me a question or something, I'm happy to answer them.
Perfect. Gosh, I'm so intrigued by your new memoir. Okay, I think we're good. I'm sorry to anyone who was disappointed by Jeffrey's quick exit, but I think that was a perfect taste of the book. And congratulations again to you on your new book, baby.
Oh,
and again, the links are in the comments. This will be on Facebook and on YouTube if anyone wants to rewatch from the beginning. And with that, I think we'll say good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us, Cynthia.
Okay, take care.
Bye, everybody.